Pleasant Grove, June 25th, 1861. My dear sister, I devote this leisure moment to writing to you. Our brother Mike is going to leave the 1st of next week. It is a fine-looking company, large, portly-looking men. Uncle Chevis has a son in the company, about 14 years old. Much love to you all, your loving sister, Vic Cunningham. January 28th, 1862. Mike has been sick with jaundice. Captain Blakely has measles, and Pinckney Vaughan is very sick with typhoid fever. There is but 10 men in Blakely's company able for duty. March 31st. What do you think of these times? I tell you, there is a dark cloud hanging over us now. Robert has gone to join the fight. He will kill all he can, and he'll scare the remainder to death. May 9th. There is a good deal of sickness and many deaths. June 19th. Our brother Mike commanded the company in the battle at Williamsburg and Richmond. He says there was a man killed on his right, and another on his left was severely wounded. William Morgan was severely wounded, as was Lemuel Dillard. Cousin Scott was wounded in the battles in Georgia, and he looks very badly. June 5th, 1863. Big Jim Goodlett is wounded in shoulder and hip. He looks very badly. Lieutenant Goodlett was very seriously wounded. Probably he is dead, as we hear nothing from him. Pinckney Vaughan is home without his arm. Mrs. Morgan's husband and brother are dead. I am as ever, your loving sister, Vic Cunningham.
What kind of a town dares to be born out of war? The Civil War left this community devastated. Greer didn't exist yet, but there were people and farms all around. And the tiny community of Pleasant Grove, at a crossroads 2 miles away, right here, there are wagon paths all around us, Brushy Creek and Buncombe and Suber, Hammett Bridge. And in all of those, there were women and children working the fields, husbands and fathers gone. Or they were home, but they were broken in body or in mind. For Vic, just as she was coming of age and various boys had been showing her favor, her primary suitor, Big Jim Goodlett, she called him her old flame. He's the one you heard her write with almost flippant resignation. Probably he's dead. We hear nothing from him. Just down the road from Vic lived William Bailey. He was 9 years older than her, and when she was 15 years old, William got married. William and Sarah lived a block down, and they went to church with her at Mount Tabor. William Bailey was a farmer, but he also ran a general store at the crossroads of Buncombe and Suber. And he also was the postmaster of Pleasant Grove, and he was also the school teacher in the community. And just before Vic wrote her very first letter to her sister Margaret, William and Sarah had a baby. Now, childbirth was not easy in those days, but they made it through successfully and had little Annie. 1 month later, on a Saturday morning, Sarah made a comment to William, "I don't feel well today." and by the end of the day, she was gone. We don't know what took her, some sudden illness that 1800s medicine couldn't touch, but it left William Bailey as a widower with an infant. And so for a year, William and Annie lived alone. And William, a farmer, a school teacher, a storekeeper, a postmaster, is now a parent doing two parents' jobs. And then that winter, pneumonia came, and baby Annie died. So these two people, Vic Cunningham, now age 22, and William Bailey at age 32, were at very different points at their lives, but they were both deeply God-centered. They looked to their faith for comfort in grief. They looked to their faith for a path forward, and there they found each other, and a relationship formed. And they were married in a very small and very quiet ceremony in September of 1865. Vic wrote her sister, "I acted from my own feelings. I hope I will never regret the steps I have taken. I am feeling assured that I have a loving and affectionate husband. So what hinders me from being perfectly happy?" Well, maybe her mother, because she wrote in the next sentence that her mother was opposed to the match, almost certainly because William was not a wealthy and powerful man. In fact, her sister, she was writing, had married a very wealthy politician, a state senator. The Baileys, Vic and William, had a little girl. They named her after Victoria's sister, Margaret. Vic loved that little girl. Baby Margaret, I love this. Baby Margaret left her struggling for words. She wrote her sister, "I hardly know what to write about my sweet babe." And then she didn't write anything else. And then in the next letter, she wrote, "I hardly know what to say about your namesake, but she's getting smarter every day." Little Margaret had a difficult time saying her own name, and so they came to call her Etta. Vic wrote in one letter, "Etta is playing with her paw. It is said by competent judges that she is a perfect beauty." And then another girl came, Estelle, and then suddenly twin boys. But really, life was hard. It was so hard. She wrote in one letter, "We are having our wheat threshed, but it is very sorry. Mr. Bailey will not make more than 1/4 of a crop this year." And then she wrote, "We are suffering at this time." William hired Carter Smith and Jerry Foster to work his farmland. These were freedmen, former slaves. These are black men trying to build their own lives in a world that had been turned upside down for them as well. And freedmen's names are mostly lost to us now, and their stories are gone, but here we have two of them living through the same devastation with fewer resources and far less power to figure out their futures. And it's interesting to me, William gave them an unusually honorable deal. For a year of farming, he gave them a house and food and firewood, land and seed and fertilizer and use of his equipment, and half the crop. With someone else handling the wheat, William taught school. But Vic wrote her sister that the number of students had gone down a lot. More of his kids were being pulled back to work in the fields. He ran for Greenville County Sheriff. And that would have been a decent salary, but he lost to P.D. Gilreath. Petey Gilreath owned that mill that's on 101 and is about to fall over. Would someone please save it? Vic started boarding people at their house to make some extra money. And actually, she loved that. There was nothing Vic loved more than caring for people and meeting their needs. The economy was really devastated at this time. After the war, money had become very tricky. Captain Blakely was a name you heard in several of her letters. He was from this community, and he had sold his farm during the war for $4,000, but in Confederate money. It's now worthless. Blakely's old farm had been left untended since the war began. It was now terribly overgrown, and the Blakely place, as they called his home, was wearing down. Let's go there now. So you're standing on the corner of Main and Poinsett, right where Mims Law Firm and Rick Irwin Steakhouse is now. You're looking kitty corner across at what will become Southern Sisters. But of course, there's no steakhouse yet, no boutique, and no asphalt. There are wagon trails cutting through the scrub. That main one, what we call Main Street, has been there a long time. That was actually a significant state road that went up and crossed Poinsett Bridge and then on up to Asheville. That's the Blakely place across the street. What used to be a farm, now overgrown. Tall wild grasses and young pine trees are growing up between what used to be rows of wheat. And right here, you are sitting in his neglected farm field. A description of that field said, tall grass and scrub pines. It is 1869, and this place, the Blakely farm, was just bought by James Manning Greer. He went by Manning. Greer was a woodcutter. He lived down off Buncombe Road, and most likely he planned to just let this grow, let these small trees grow and come back and harvest them. He did not move here. He didn't farm the land. Perhaps he was just looking for lumber, but perhaps there was this sense of hope in the community. You see, before the war, there were railroads talking about coming through, and those talks had stopped during the war, but now they were picking up again. Did Manning Greer foresee the possibility of a track coming through this land? We simply don't know. But the Atlanta and Richmond Airline Railway would be running somewhere through the upstate. And exactly where it ran mattered a lot. Their plan was to build a major central depot in Anderson. Greenville didn't like that idea. So they put together a committee of men. William T. Shoemate is the head of this committee, and he is going to go work with the railroad to help them find the best route and help negotiate property. And the railroad said, yeah, we'll work with you. And they convinced the railroad to put the major depot in Greenville, and then another in Spartanburg, and now they needed a stop halfway in between. The obvious route would take them through Reedville, a couple miles south of us. It made so much sense. That route was smooth. It was easy building tracks there. Reedville was already an established town, and it had a number of country roads that converged on it. It was the perfect and obvious location. But for whatever reason, the Reedville city fathers were very demanding and very hard to work with. And the railroad said, forget it. We're giving up on you. And if you drew a line on the map from the Greenville Depot to the Spartanburg Depot and just straight, instead of dipping through Reedville, that line went through farm fields. And the railroad started going farm by farm, and we have these records of them getting land, and that committee with Shoemate convinced farmers to donate their land. And so we have donated land moving up from Greenville. He comes to Alfred Taylor, his land, Taylor's, and then Albert Greer, and then Marie Greer, and then George, and then Nancy. And now the route is up to the Blakely farm, owned by our man James M. And it was here, in this abandoned farm field, that the railroad would build a depot. There's no town here, right? Just this field. So they didn't know what to call it. They bought it from Greer. They called it Greer's Depot. It was the spring of 1873 when they started preparing a roadbed and laying tracks. And in the summer of 1873, the railroad began construction of the depot a block behind me at the next tracks down. So let's look at that place now. They built the depot right up against the tracks. It didn't have a platform. You're looking up this way at what would be Trade Street. The Blakely place is far across the field, several hundred yards away, a couple blocks up and over from where we are now. But there was nothing else here at all. But for the first time since the war, there was something like excitement. You know, this depot is in the middle of nowhere, but it was there nowhere. Like, for these farmers, it was like a miracle had dropped right here. Now, the railroad needed a station attendant, and a guy applied for the job named William Bailey, and he got the job. With no town here, there was no reason for trains to stop at this depot, so they made it a flag station. And what that meant is the trains would not stop unless William Bailey came out and took his flag and signaled the train to stop, to pick up freight, or for a passenger to get on. And if it's nighttime, they would use the lantern. This lantern came out of William Bailey's house. And so in this little flag stop, I have a hard time even imagining this. Did this mean William Bailey spent his day sitting around with nothing to do, waiting for a passenger to come or a load of fertilizer? Well, he was a really busy guy. And my guess is he was doing multiple jobs at the same time. Why did he take the job? Certainly he needed the money. But I have to think that it was the chance to be in the center of opportunity. What was going to happen here? And he was in the middle of it. And there was another man who saw the opportunity too. His name was William Shoemate. He was the head of that railroad committee. He believed that this little depot was in a key location. It's right by a crossing of a state road. It has numerous little community wagon trails that converge on this spot. This is perfect for a new town. And so William Shoemate bought the rest of Manning Greer's farm. And he hired a surveyor and he laid out streets, and just between here and the Blakely place, he started selling lots. And immediately, his lots began to sell. Henry Westmoreland was the community doctor. He bought the first piece of land, signed up for a lot, and then Vic Bailey's brother, John Cunningham, he signed up for a lot, and then a merchant, William Hill, he signed up for a lot. Like, there was a sense of palpable excitement. We're starting a town here. The community, the railroad ran a train, a work train, across the tracks in early September of 1873. First train across the tracks. And then they announced the depot will open for business in October. And at just that moment, the world fell apart. It was the first global economic crash. Historians now call it the Panic of 1873, but if you read the newspapers in September and October of 1873, they called it the Great Depression. Many banks failed worldwide. This was global. It started with a Swiss bank collapsing. 155 US railroads went bankrupt, and that included the Atlanta and Richmond. Henry Westmoreland and John Cunningham and William Hill and the others who had signed on for early lots backed out. Without a railroad, there was no reason for a town to exist here. Right? This fledgling town was going to die before it was even born. What kind of a town dares to be born despite its own bankruptcy? Like, the smart thing was to go find your next opportunity. But in reality, somehow the railroad found new investors. They reorganized as the Atlanta and Charlotte. Amazingly, the depot opened on time, October of 1873, and trains started to run, and William Bailey was in business. Greer was in business. In fact, in 1874, 9 lots sold, and in 1875, countless lots sold. People were buying large lots and subdividing and selling small lots for the price they had just paid for the big one. It was a real estate boom. Simeon Hughes threw up a little shack on an intersection right up here of a street to be named later and a street to be named later. That's what his land deed says. We know it was the corner where the galleries of Brian Brigham are now. It was the first town building. It was the first town business. Like, tangible proof that this town is going to be real. And one by one, lots sold, and more lots sold. And William Hill opened up a bigger, nicer store. And John Carman opened up a blacksmith shop right here. Cicero Randall opened up a store right over here and got a street named after him. D.D. Davenport came into town and built this very fine store that is still standing on the corner. And then David Cannon built a house and moved his family in, right about where the spinning jenny used to be. They're the first family to move in. Now, William and Vic are living at what was now called Bailey's Crossroads, Pleasant Grove, a couple miles away, and they say, it's time for us to move in. Simeon Hughes' little shack of a store was no longer suitable for this town, and he sold his property to William Bailey. And William and Vic bought that lot and tore down his shack of a store, and they built a home right there. They moved onto what was now being called Trade Street, and their deed says, at the intersection of a cross street still not named. Vic wrote a letter to her sister. She said, I would love to come see you, but I have no one to tend my cows and chickens. She's raising cows and chickens on Trade Street. But boy, the energy was intense. Land deals are happening almost daily now. And the train station was Greer's Depot, right? That's a building. What do we call our community? And they started calling it Greer's Station. Lewis Green moved into town, and he started construction on a huge 2-story hotel right across the street here. He also took one more very important step. Lewis Green petitioned the state legislature to officially charter the city of Greers. The legislature put it on their calendar for a vote in March of 1876. In February, right before the vote, excitement is at its peak. Mr. Green completes construction of his hotel, but before it could welcome its first guest, a disaster hit. A group of small children went into the hotel. They were just playing and exploring, and they found a finished hotel, but there was a little bit of construction debris in a corner. Some wood scraps, a little pile of sawdust. And in each room of that fine hotel, there was a fireplace. So they pulled this wood into the fireplace and started a fire. A little girl's dress caught fire. Her name was Estelle Bailey. She was 6 years old. The kids tried to put out her dress, but the sawdust on the floor caught fire, and it spread instantly, and the other children escaped, but not Estelle. The building ended in charred rubble with Estelle Bailey inside. So Vic and William buried their daughter. The newspaper story the next morning lectured parents on keeping a better eye on their children, which to me read as kind of heartless. It wasn't the last fire, as fires swept across our town and took building after building after building, eventually taking our tiny one-room city hall with all of our early city records with it. So, what kind of a town dares to be born of fire? We aren't even a city yet. On March 25th of 1876, the state legislature voted to officially establish the city of Greers. That is apostrophe S. Over time, the apostrophe would be dropped, and then the S to eventually give us our name today. The legislature called for our city to hold its first municipal election on the first Monday of April. That's April 3rd, 1876. And it calls for us to elect an intendant and 4 wardens. That's their version of a mayor and city council. And then one other position, a town cotton weigher. So the election was held. 15 men came to this vote. Women weren't allowed to vote. And 15 votes were put into this, Greer's first ballot box. 15 voices saying, "We believe this town has a future." And William Bailey was elected the first intendant, our first mayor. But just 3 weeks after burying his daughter. So imagine him standing in the depot back here, taking an oath of office in that moment. And I imagine Vic standing there, watching like grief and pride and hope, like all of these things bound up in her. It had been a long and hard road, but Greer's was on the map, even if the railroad misspelled it on the map. All right. The little depot didn't have a platform, but as the town is growing, they build a depot platform. And then over the platform, they install a cotton scale. install Thaddeus Westmoreland. I love it. Thaddeus becomes our first town cotton weigher, and farmers from miles around are bringing their cotton crop to Greer to be auctioned off. A few tons of cotton loaded on a wagon, pulled by mules or oxen, take most of a day to get to Greer's. And by the time it was auctioned off, there was rarely time to get home. I'm going to have to spend the night here. I'm alone, away from my family. And I have my entire annual salary in cash in my pocket. I need a place to celebrate. In 1879, there were 8 homes in Greer, 8 houses. And there were 3 saloons and 4 stores, all which sold whiskey. And these saloons were the Wild West kind with women upstairs. And 8 families are not enough to hire a policeman. And the situation went completely out of control, ranging from fistfights to murder. Crime rose to the point that people stayed away. Land sales stopped. No one was moving in. Moonshiners from the Dark Corner, that's a mountainous area north of town, took advantage of us not having a police force and used Greer as a major distribution point. And this, I love this so much, true story. A brewery in Atlanta sent a refrigerated tank car of beer up the railroad tracks to Greer. Finally, Greer hired a policeman, Willis Foster, and he was shot and killed by bootleggers. You know, this town could have failed then. You have 8 families all regretting their move. No one was joining them. What kind of town dares to be born out of blood like that? Lawlessness, moonshine, and murder. You know, that was 1879, but Greer's had had enough. They fought back. It turns out William Bailey had been significantly involved in the temperance movement. He was very much opposed to alcohol in the first place, and he was seeing it lived out in front of his eyes. And so he led a petition to ban liquor in the city, and it passed, and Greer's became the first dry town in South Carolina, long before Prohibition. Then one more crime shook our young town to its core. George Hughes, a beloved store owner in the community, was shot and killed by his drunk wife in front of their 7-year-old son. She went to trial. 3 mistrials later, she got off scot-free. Greer's had had enough, and they fought back. And as the town fought back, it all changed. And we know this because in 1881, 2 years later, a man came to visit and he wrote down what he saw.
Greenville Enterprise and Mountaineer, March 2nd, 1881. Last Thursday morning, we made a visit to Greer's. We proceeded from the railroad depot to the house of William C. Bailey, Esquire. We found the gentleman at home and his wife serving dinner. After finishing a repast, we asked him to tell us how the place was progressing. To this, he offered to walk around the town with us. The first point visited was the new Baptist church. It is a sacred edifice. The new Presbyterian church is almost complete and ready for dedication. The Greer's Educational Association has built a large structure with a bell and with stoves. They teach English, Latin, and music. The city of Greer's has a population of 500 persons. Last year, 1,500 bales of cotton were sold there and 1,000 tons of guano. For several years, Greer's was noted for its disorder, disquiet, and drunkenness. It became the custom of ladies to go out on the streets only when accompanied by male friends. Many good people avoided the town altogether. On one typical day, there were 7 fights. In 1879, the good citizens of Greer's sent a petition to the General Assembly asking to prohibit the sale of alcoholic liquors within the city limits. With no grog shops to blight its fair face, Greer's has been transformed from a brothel to a quiet, orderly, and progressive place. Greer's is now quiet and pleasant, and the people there cordially invite all good and law-abiding citizens to come and settle with them.
Cordially invite. I wonder if that wasn't more like beg and plead. And if you don't know, the 1,000 pounds of guano is bird poop. That's fertilizer. You know, I can just imagine that walk. William and a reporter walking up Trade Street on a Thursday afternoon in March of 1881. And for William, 10 years ago, there was no street. And 2 years ago, that street was mayhem. And now you have 2 churches rising and a school with a heated building and families walking around without fear and women on the streets unaccompanied. You know, he must have felt that shift, you know, from chaos to order, from shame to pride. Can you imagine being the mayor in 1879? And this town had now turned a corner, and he had led it there. But William Bailey had struggled his whole life with chronic illness. And this started to grow more severe. And now with 5 children, he concluded his term as mayor and threw all his work hard into the depot, but his health was failing him. His daughter, Etta, now 18, went to the Greenville Women's College. And Vic wrote her a letter and said, "Your pa is not very able to work, and his money comes hard." And then a few months later, she wrote, "Your pa is still very poorly, suffers all the time with a severe pain in his breast. If he gets any worse, I will let you come home and see him." Seeing what was to come, they had a portrait of William made, a sort of memorial. It would be the only picture of William that we have. I've seen this picture 1,000 times over the last 6 years, and it wasn't until the last few months I put together, this is a man facing death, but proudly. William got worse. His body was racked with extreme pain, and Vic said, "He told me, 'Oh, that death would come and relieve me of such suffering.'" And in October of 1882, William, at age 49, was gone. Vic was a widow with 5 children in 1882. That is a bleak forecast. But Vic was strong. She continued to run her boarding house up here on Trade Street and raise her cows and chickens, but now she began buying and selling little lots of land. And then she started buying and selling larger lots. And then she discovered sheriff sales where she could buy foreclosed properties. And she became a real estate investor. She started loaning money to local farmers to buy fertilizer. And she had the audacity and boldness to sue one of them when he refused to pay up. Over the next decade, Miss Vick gathered this extensive portfolio of properties that ended up including the entire east side of Trade Street. She owned every inch from Barista Alley to where we are. And at the same time, she poured her life into her church. There is a book on important Presbyterian women, and it wrote of Victoria Bailey, "If ever there are pillars in a church or mothers in Israel, surely Victoria Bailey is all of that in Mount Tabor Church." But her own life was about to be cut short. In 1895, she got tuberculosis. And after months of decline, with it apparent that death was coming near, she too went to Charlie Drace's photo studio for a portrait. This portrait. And in March of 1896, only 54 years old, Miss Vick died. The Greenville paper wrote this the next day.
Her husband preceded her to the grave 14 years and left her to raise her young family. Well did she perform her duty. She took up the burden as a true heroine. Such was her ability and business tact that she supported her family in comfort and affluence. She relied upon the promise of God that he would be a husband to the widow and a father to the fatherless. One of her chief traits of character was kindness and hospitality. Her house was the home for many, and never did she seem happier than when entertaining and ministering to their comfort. She died as she lived, in the triumph of a living faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. To all who knew her, her memory is precious.
Victoria's house was on the corner of Trade and a street that had never been named. And Greer's finally knew what to call it. What started me down this whole path was asking, why does Greer not have a street named for our first mayor, but we have one named for his wife? What kind of a town dares to be born out of war and bankruptcy and fire and blood? Well, it's this kind of town. It's Victoria Bailey's town. It's our town. You know, I think about Victoria Bailey never saw what Greer would become. Rick's been our mayor 20 years, and look what he has led. It's unbelievable. You know, when she died, this town was barely 20 years old. It was dirt paths. It was a few hundred people. It was still fighting to survive. And she couldn't have imagined what you drove past to get here today, the streets and the buildings and just our life. But she built the foundation. She did, and William did, and those 15 men dropping ballots in this box, and their wives. And then their children who picked up the torch from them like William and Victoria's kids did. These are people that decided that this place, born of hardship and trial and difficulty, was worth fighting for. And because they did, we're here. And this is just the beginning of Greer's story, right? Greer's hardest days were actually still ahead, and we'll talk about that in the months to come. But today, I wanted you to see and meet the woman who taught this town how to survive hard days. And next time you walk down Trade Street and cross Victoria Street, look up at the gallery of Brian Bigham, where a stone plaque has carved in it the name Bailey. That building was built by a man named T.E. Smith. He put her name as a memorial. Remember what it cost them to build a town out of nothing, and love that we get to be a part of it. Thank you.